So we are now at the point where we have been introduced to the concept of multiliteracy, of waking up not only ready to work, but to work with both hands. I think the metaphor is very apt. Our speakers today will help us to understand just exactly what that additional hand provides for us and how we can foster that capacity within our state. Our first speaker, our first invited speaker, is Linda Egnatz. She is from Frankfort, Illinois. Right now, she is teaching at Lincoln Way High School. She is a nationally board certified Spanish teacher, as you have read. She is a woman who is passionate about the value of additional languages. She has done more work in her state to make the seal of biliteracy happen than I assume any other individual, because every time I look over there, all I see is activity that Linda is moving things forward. She's also the past president of the Illinois Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and she continues in a post with them as their webmaster. She has been invited to speak all over the country. She's inspiring people all over the country to recognize the value of the seal of biliteracy, and we are very grateful to have her here, a very capable teacher, the 2014 National ACTFL Teacher of the Year, and I hope that we can all learn very much from her.
So I sort of titled my presentation with a hashtag that we've been using in Illinois and we've started to sort of share around the country. And that hashtag is too bilit to quit. And that's really what we want our students to be. And so we needed to come up with sort of something quick and something easy that also speaks to the 21st century that our students are now a part of. It is a digital communicative age. And our students can connect with people not just here in Honolulu or in the rest of the islands here in Hawaii, but also across the United States and the world. And so we really want to equip our students to do that. And so this concept of too bilit to quit has become really personal to me, because for a long time, just as a language teacher, my students, I would see them, they were going to come take 1 or 2 years of a language and stop. And unfortunately, language learning, as I'm going to share, is a skill. And it does become, and I just really love the image of the two hands of being tools. It really does become a tool for the future. But tools are, need to be used. They need to be practiced. They need to be, you need to gain finesse with them. And so this idea of too bilit to quit is really important for me. I want them to continue their language learning and not quit. And not quit with just the second language, but again, the multiple languages that make more opportunity available. The second part says seal the deal. And for me, that deal is something that we're going to sort of bridge the too bilit to quit with our 21st century digital learners, but with our business community, because the deal is incredibly a bigger one and a more impactful one when the students that we are growing in our schools to become a part of a business and commercial entity. They become a part of a global enterprise. And they will, in fact, for those of you who work in businesses and different sorts of commercial entities here in Hawaii, they will seal the deal for you, because they will be those who can make those connections, not just linguistic ones, but cultural ones. They will be more aware of the diversity available that surrounds us and can make those connections. And so I really encourage you, if you know someone who's a 21st century Twitter user, to say, hey, too bilit to quit. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce you to a particular gentleman I heard last year speak in Washington, D.C. He's serving as a Deputy Assistant Secretary to the White House Office of Education. His name is Mohammed Abdelkader, and he made several comments in a speech that really resonated with me about language. Because oftentimes we think about language as something we learn in the classroom. It's sort of a school subject. And he really looked at it in a lot different way. And he started looking at a lot of statistics. And he came up with some comments that I thought were really pertinent to what our issues are with language learning. And that is the first one, that language learning is a civil rights narrative. Around the world, in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, where I spend a lot of time, in Asia, we see students learning languages at an early age. Not just the language of their home country, but a language of countries they may never actually ever visit. This last summer, I had the opportunity to be in Cuba leading a tour of teachers. We were on a teacher language delegation. And I learned that in Cuba, a country that has been restricted to a lot of outside influences, and certainly to those from the United States, but that in Cuba, in 3rd grade, they learn English. And they start there, and they learn English and continue until they leave high school. And so they're quite capable of communicating with tourists that they often never see. And yet, that is a value to them. And if it's a value to a place that's very closed, and as we start to see it now become an open sort of forum and continue to grow, the opportunities that are in front of those students, in front of those children, are great. And that's really the first piece I started thinking about with my own students. I'm from Illinois, and that's right smack dab in the Midwest of the continent, where we don't have any international borders. We have a coastline. It's Lake Michigan. The people on the other side of our Great Lake, it is a really big lake, is Michigan. And they also, so our students aren't necessarily compelled to learn a language in the way that your students all have opportunity to do. And yet, in the university where, our students are gaining degrees in engineering and in pharmacy, the companies within the state of Illinois are saying, we can't hire your students because we have several large companies, but 2 of those have a lot of international entities. One of those is Caterpillar with the big construction equipment, and a similar company is John Deere, both located in Illinois. And they said, well, we'd like some of these engineers. They've got great engineering qualifications, but they don't have a language. And we have an online sort of application procedure, and someone from China and someone from India and someone from Germany can apply for the same job. And if they're all equal in terms of their engineering skills, we'll hire the one that has the most language ability because they offer the most flexibility for our country, or our company here in Illinois. And so that became like, whoa, that means this is true, that it's a civil rights narrative if my students don't have opportunity to longer learning experiences with language. The second thing he said was that 1 in 5 jobs is linked to international economy. Now that's across the United States. I can only imagine that here in Hawaii that number is even greater. And so if that is the case, then we really want to open up those opportunities for our students to be able to have more access to those kind of global connections and that global economy. And last he said this, and this applied to me, like really hit home as a language teacher in the classroom. He said, language learning is not a nice to have. It's an essential. When I was going to high school, language was not an option. In fact, when I was in high school, only 19% of high schools across the country offered foreign language. It wasn't popular. And I started language as a second language learner when I got to college. That was my very first experience, and I loved it. I loved the diversity of the people that I met. I was curious about culture. And our students are naturally curious. But it isn't a nice to have anymore. As it was very eloquently stated, it becomes a global responsibility. It is enabling, essentially, our students if they only have one hand with language. And so we really want to open those opportunities for them. So I thought I would share some stats. And we oftentimes are compared with Europe as a country, as a nation. But these are not unusual although these statistics come to us between the U.S. Department of Education and Europe, these statistics I have seen in other places in the world that I've traveled. I've been in Japan, I've been in China, I've been throughout Latin America, I have been in Africa, and I don't see a big difference. People come up to me sort of like the young boy on the streets in Thailand, and they can speak my language. And I've seen people in very poor circumstances that are bilingual or multilingual. And so that is, this is a big piece. But these statistics, I think, are powerful to look at. These, again, come from Europe, and it's very important for them because in Europe, they have sort of like we have sort of states. They have, it is important for work that they can cross global borders and communicate. It is an economy issue that their graduates and whatever job they may have language sort of possibilities. And so in Europe, it said that 73% speak a second language well. That's how they've identified. In the United States, that's only 25% that identify themselves as a second language speaker well. But here's the sad part, that as a language teacher, horrified me. And that was that only, of the 25%, only 7% identified themselves as learning a language well in a classroom. That meant I'm failing. That meant we're not doing a good enough job. And I know part of that has to do with the fact that oftentimes in the United States, we start students too late. We're waiting until high school to begin a language. And that's not the best time. These children that we heard this morning were a powerful example of how language learning is important and at a younger age. And so that was awful. That meant that the majority of people who speak 2 languages in the United States learn them at home. But that also provides a secondary lesson, that if you have a second language, a heritage language, as a natal gift, that the best thing we can do as a community is support and nourish and help them sustain and hold on to that. Because there's people that are wishing they could learn that language now, and they already have it. The second statistic was even worse. This again comes from Europe, but in Europe, 90% of grade school children have second language exposure, second language learning. In the United States, that's only 15%. And of those 15%, they're very different kinds of programs. Some of them are once a week. Some of them we just learn the names of our colors and the names of a few pieces of fruit and some animals, and we call it language learning. And it's not meaningful and it's not usable language. And the third detail, notice there's no orange chip for the United States to go with it, that in Europe, 42% say they speak 3 or more languages well. We don't even have that statistic for the United States. And so we don't compare well. But again, it's not just Europe. It's continents all over. In all sorts of sort of financial circumstances, language learning by others is seen as critical and important. And so coming back to that original statement, if we don't provide that for our students, they have an access issue. It's a civil rights issue for them. And so here's a little bit further data in the United States. Only 44% of high school students are enrolled in language courses, less than half. In the European Union, they have what they call 1+2. Your native language, your heritage language, your home language, plus 2 more languages. And so they become very competitive and can cross those global borders. They can reach out and participate in an economy that goes beyond their national borders. Only 51% of universities require language study. Again, we're equipping them to do incredible jobs in lots of other career areas. But if we could only add language so that alongside of that career choice, they have a more opportunity and access to employment, we would be serving them better. This comes to us from ACTFL. ACTFL is the American Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And what that was, one of the pieces that association has been doing, it's been really getting a lot of data. And this chart came to us in November, actually. And what it is on the side here, on the left-hand side, over here, this shows proficiency levels. In other words, the level of ability of functional skills that people have within a foreign language. Then here, we have a descriptor of what that language can do. These are some examples of some of the jobs that they can have. And here we have, once again, the actual professions available. And I've circled this spot here because until we get to this intermediate mid-level of proficiency where someone can actually create their own messages, not just memorize phrases like, hi, how are you, I am fine, until they can begin to create their own messages, they are not employable in a second language. They can't even handle occasional use. And so imagine when, for example, the hospitality community and commerce here is so great in Hawaii, if they don't have that a minimal ability to handle those things, that's where that becomes, is this level here. Well, the Seal of Biliteracy is recognizing across the country students who have achieved this level and higher. And that's really what we want, because what jobs are available here in the traditional 1 or 2 or 3 years of language study? Nothing. Unfortunately, they're the parents that come to me when we have, parent-teacher or back-to-school nights and conferences, and they say, I took 2 years of fill-in-the-blank language, and I can't say a thing. And unfortunately, that's a common experience that I have with parents. And so they don't see language learning as valuable because was not valuable to them. And so I really want to think about how do we then equate what proficiency level is. And so what we're doing with the Seal of Biliteracy is an incredible piece for students. we're raising the awareness of language, but we're also raising the bar. And we're letting them know that if you want to use language as a viable tool in the workforce, you have to be better at it. And so we're providing both incentive and recognition. And together, those two things make a really powerful tool. So why the seal? And I just wanted to share some of the reasons why, to me, it's become an incredibly powerful way to influence students. And the first one is that I've just mentioned. It is both incentive and recognition. It is something that students want to strive for. In my particular state, and it may be true here as well in Hawaii, college admission is very competitive, especially if they want to get into a really good school or they want to get into a good program. And so anything that a student can put on those applications that makes them to stand out, that makes them look a little bit better or a little bit more competitive or a little bit more special than another student is something that parents want, and it's something that students want. And so in the state of Illinois, for us to be able to put that onto our students' diploma, they have something more. And a good example of that is a student, one of mine, he said that when he was being interviewed as far as the seal of biliteracy, he said, well, when I took the AP exam for advanced placement in college and I got a 4, he said, people said, that's nice, because they have no idea what I did to get that. And it's not easy. He said, but when I told my boss that I was going to get the seal of biliteracy, he said, wow, you must be really good at Spanish. Because it's something that communicates, not just to our families and our students, but to our communities and the business community at large. The second reason is that, once again, language is not a college requirement now. We look at it as an enviable life skill. And I think for too long in a lot of colleges, there was that list, 2 years as an entry requirement. Well, no one ever explained that the reason for that was there was so much else you had to study in college that they wanted you to come in with some skills so that you could take some more language and come out with some, something that would really work in the workforce. Unfortunately, the message that came to high school students is, you take 2 years and you're done. And they take it as a freshman and a sophomore in high school, in many cases, and they don't really retain very much of it. And if they do get to college, they have to start all over again, or at least start behind where they left off. And so rather than looking at this as that kind of college requirement, I want them to think about this as not as a graduation credit to, sort of to check off, but rather something that will really check them in to future opportunities. And that becomes then my goal for students. So again, taking a piece from ACTFL, this comes to us in their proficiency descriptors, or a sort of kind of a really very detailed set of describing kind of, scenarios of what can someone do at different levels. And this is what these particular stats and data says, and these come, I believe, from 2008. So we see some changes happening. But remember, they had to be at this sort of middle green intermediate level to be able to be functional at work, even in simple sort of jobs like a receptionist or someone who worked in public safety, for example, that our high school students are hardly getting there unless they take at least 4 years. And so then as a community, that becomes important for us to say we need to expand that opportunity for students. I love this quote because it comes from Vince Lombardi. Now, you had a big Pro Bowl here yesterday. The traffic was very high. Some of you are like, yes, it was. And obviously, we have the Super Bowl coming up. And the Super Bowl trophy is named after this particular coach, Vince Lombardi of the Green Bay Packers. One of, in my town, we're Chicago Bears fans, and they are our enemies, the Packers. But he said something I thought was really powerful. They lost a very important game. And he was interviewed after the game. And he said, they said, well, how do you feel about this loss, coach? And he said, we didn't lose the game. We just ran out of time. And I really think that makes me feel a little bit better as a teacher, that I'm not necessarily losing the game. I'm getting my students from a place they weren't where they started, but I am but I just ran out of time. If I only had students longer, I'd be able to get them to a place of higher levels of proficiency. And so that became really sort of the idea for me. We kind of started launching this concept of what would it really look like? What could we do? And that's one of the questions I love to ask is, what if? There may be some things that are working. but what if we did one more thing? What if we changed one piece of the sort of puzzle? What could happen? What if? And so I kind of wanted to give you a little visual from, again, a high school teacher's point of view. And I'd like to introduce you to Jake. And Jake is our high school quarterback. He's graduating this year. And we had an incredible year. 8 years ago, my school building opened. And when we opened, our first season, we only had freshmen, sophomores, and juniors in football. And that first year was really rough because out of 10 regular season games, we lost all 10. The next year, because the other teams had seniors that were bigger and faster and more, more experience. The next year, we only lost one game. This year, we went completely undefeated until we got to the state quarterfinals. And Jake was a big part of that. And Jake is a good football player. He's been sought out. He's got a football scholarship. But Jake did not start being a high school quarterback. It started a lot sooner when Jake was just a little guy. And, skills take a really, really long time to get good at. And so when we have an opportunity to expand the learning experiences for students, that makes a big difference. And we have to keep, it takes time to learn a skill. It's like a musical instrument or any kind of sport or art or anything. Language learning is not memorizing a vocabulary list and a group of conjugations that we don't know how to put together. Language comes with practice. And the most meaningful practice is with other individuals who speak the language, with that sort of real audience. My students are happy if they do well on a test. But when they survive, even at a very basic level, an interaction with a speaker of the language that they're learning, they are so empowered. You won't believe it. They understood everything I said. They're so excited when they come and share those stories. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of practice. And until we provide our students that, we can't expect these kind of winning quarterbacks in language unless we give them those sort of opportunities. And I just wanted to share, just kind of brag, because Jake is my student. He's receiving this year the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy as a graduate. So he's great on the football field, but he's great in a language classroom too. And so imagine what those combinations are going to provide for him in the future. And so we want to think about this as the idea of seeing our students not just as test takers, but as language users. And that means as a teacher, I have to see myself as an opportunity provider. I have to be able to give them that opportunity, that chance. I have to paint the vision for them of what does it look like if you use the language learning in these classroom walls with people who speak the language outside of our walls. Students oftentimes feel like whatever we learn, I'll never use this. And have any of you taken a class and you thought, I'll never use this? Well, our students, until we paint the pictures for them of what that looks like, and we help them imagine it, they don't think of it themselves either. And so here's the mission that I sort of became an advocate for. And anytime I have an opportunity to speak to anyone, I'm going to say it, whether it's on topic or not. And that is because if we have and develop, like other countries, this sort of kindergarten through 12th grade vision, really through university, this is what can happen. Because in our lower levels, when students learn language, they're often a part of dual language and immersion classes. And this offers an incredibly rich vocabulary for them to acquire. And if you think about it, and if they do those dual language or immersion classes, they're learning science vocabulary, they're learning social studies and economy vocabulary, and that is something that actually is the vocabulary of the workplace. So I had the opportunity during my year in 2014 as the ACTFL National Language Teacher of the Year to visit some dual language and immersion programs. And as a high school teacher, that was really exciting because I only see, I have to start students when they're 14. I had the opportunity to observe students that are learning since they were 4 or 5 or 6. And so I had an opportunity in Arizona to listen, to observe some classes, and they were kindergartners. And they were already speaking the language to their teacher. Then I watched a third grade class in Wisconsin. And I got to observe in Mandarin, third graders talking about the life cycle of butterflies. And I thought, my AP students can't do that in Spanish. And then I was in a really incredible program in Massachusetts. And I observed fifth graders talking, and they were studying colonial America. And they were talking about the imports and the exports of colonial America and the commerce and the trade in French. And I thought, my AP students, my advanced placement students, those students that are going to get college credit for my class, they can't talk about the United States imports and exports in Spanish because they don't have that vocabulary. This year, right now, I'm in a unit, finishing up a unit on the environment and global challenges. And we're talking about things like the scarcity of water. We're talking about deforestation. We're talking about endangered species. But before I can talk to them about deforestation, I still have to teach them the word for tree. And so that learning, that cognitive problem solving that would be so interesting and so valuable to the high school student is lost because they don't have this foundational vocabulary. And that's the opportunity we have with a longer language learning experience, is that we can present those opportunities for expanded vocabulary learning. And then, when they get to high school, the brains start to kick in, and we can start, and high school students love to solve the world's problems. They've got lots of opinions, they're very idealistic, and if we give them, if they come with a language to discuss things that are important to them, that are important to their world, and we begin to use language to talk about meaningful things instead of reciting numbers from 1 to 100, imagine what they can do. And then we take those students into the university setting and beyond, into the workforce. And now they have not only expanded opportunity, but they have the language, they've acquired the language to be really useful and do meaningful work and have meaningful conversations with others. And it's not anywhere near that middle green intermediate space. It's at the advanced levels and the superior levels where they can walk in and say, and get the job they ask for. And so I want to share just a little bit about the Illinois experience with the Seal of Biliteracy. And each state is really, really unique, and each state has its own needs. And so when Illinois began to look at this, we actually started with the New York model, which was one of the second states. But it went in as as an executive order as opposed to a legislative process. But they found that it didn't quite work for them. And so they began to tweak some of the language and some of the purposes. And so just want to share a little bit, what does it look like in other states? Because we see that each state is unique, and yet at the same time we have a similarity of value, and that is that we're valuing the higher levels of proficiency of a language. And so this is from the Senate Bill 1221, and I had the incredible honor and privilege of being able to testify on behalf of this bill before both our Senate Education Committees as well as our representatives. And it became a very logical thing for them to say, yeah, this is exactly what students need, and this is what they said. The State Seal of Biliteracy certifies attainment of a high level of proficiency. And this was the part that was really key to the community at large, to the workforce. Sufficient for meaningful use in college and a career by a graduating public high school pupil in one or more languages in addition to English. And so that piece of sufficient for meaningful use was really important, and that was part of the language that they wanted to have. And so then they also added this little piece as an amendment. It is the intent of the legislature to encourage excellence for all pupils, and the legislature wishes to publicly recognize pupils for exemplary achievements in academic studies. So that was sort of a big piece, kind of an overarching piece. And then they said this: the study of languages other than English in elementary and secondary schools should be encouraged. So they recognized the skill factor, that elementary and secondary language is a good team. Should be encouraged because it contributes to a pupil's cognitive development. There is so much research out there about the benefits to the brain and how the brain works and functions differently in the mind of someone who has more than one language, as well as our national economy and our security. They also said proficiency in multiple languages is critical in enabling this state to participate effectively in global political, social, and economic contexts and in expanding trade with other countries. And that's something Illinois really works at. You know, they want to be a global trading partner, even though we are right back in the middle of the continent. And so I think that they recognized language was critical to that, to achieve that. They also added these purposes to encourage pupils to study languages, to certify the attainment of biliteracy. You know, a lot of people can put on a resume languages spoken, you know, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, and you have no idea what that really means. You know, can they say hi, goodbye, my name is, or can they actually, you know, work out the details of a business contract? And and just that language isn't enough. And so what this allows is to attain what that actually means. It defines it for everyone involved. To provide employers with a method of identifying people with language and biliteracy skills. So it's a service to that business and work community. To provide universities with an additional method to recognize applicants seeking admission. Before I taught high school, with a move to Illinois, my husband relocated, so I moved with him. I was teaching in Indiana at Purdue University. And one of the things that I found in one particular course I taught, that it was what they referred to as a bridge course. You know, we had students coming in with some high school experience in Spanish. They had enough to get through the first semester, but they didn't really have enough usable language to say that they had the equivalent of the second semester. And so they created this sort of bridge combination course. Instead of a 101 and a 102, they called it a 103, and it was only one semester long. And in that class, I had students who came with 1 year of high school Spanish, and I had students who came with 4 years of high school Spanish. And so just because a student comes with an A on a transcript to a university admissions office or language department, it doesn't mean very much. It doesn't have that consistency. And so we really wanted to provide not just universities, but also an employer with some sort of standard of what that proficiency looks like so they all knew what it meant. And so that's a piece of it. To prepare pupils with 21st century skills. You know, we interact digitally, and we're a connected world, even without travel. To recognize the value of foreign language, and this is really key, native language instruction in public schools. And in the Midwest, we have some indigenous languages, many of which are endangered. And there's been efforts to sort of revive some of those. But we want to, and native also refers here just to the language of home. You know, that heritage language that we want to support and not lose. To strengthen intergroup relationships, to affirm the value of diversity and honor the multiple cultures and languages of a community. And if there is any place in the country that has multiple languages and diversity, it is here. And so this is an opportunity then to really honor that and to respect that and to build that mutual collaboration amongst ourselves. So it became in Illinois a new focus. And so after the bill passed, there was a huge flurry of activity. And the Chicago Tribune, I finally was a cover girl. It was so exciting. And then I thought, you know, I don't really want to be on the front cover. So I said, put me on the next page. And they put one of my students, who was going to be receiving one of the Illinois' first seals in our pilot program. My school piloted it a year before the state did. And so they put her on the cover. And what an exciting day it was for my class, because for the whole day, they were supposed to come and interview us for a couple of hours, and they stayed the whole day and observed different levels of classes to see what students could do. And I think that was the really big piece. And so this became an important part of it. And this comes then from our state superintendent, and just the whole Illinois Board of Education, and he said, language skills are increasingly valuable in today's global economy. The seal will help promote and acknowledge the great value and many benefits that come with being multilingual, not just bilingual, multilingual and multicultural. And I think that that's a really important piece. And so for them to observe my students, and my students are not heritage learners. I have what we refer to as sort of standard speakers. They're like me. They're, you know, in Spanish terms, they're gringas like I am. And so that piece, that they're learning that language, is really exciting to see. And so then that first year, we did as a pilot, we were able to, you know, sort of, I guess, try out the situation, try out the seal, and to sort of start to work out the kinks for what would happen with other schools who chose to adopt. But it was so powerful because here are some of my students, and two of these students here in the front row also certified in Mandarin. They're heritage Chinese speakers who have come to the United States as an English language learner, and then took Spanish in my class as well. And so here's been one of my students here getting his certificate. And so what an impressive thing. And we had several, these are just my students, but there were several other students. We had about 80 students qualify in the first year. We have a high school district of about 8,000 students. But the parents of the English language learners, many of them came up to me in tears. So I get emotional. And they said, you know, we feel valued. We feel our culture valued. We never knew that it was important, and now we wish we had used more language with our students at home. And that's one of the sort of the outcomes of this, is to be able to say, not only are we valued, but also what can the home community do to support a language? You know, you might just have that table talk, but that's language at a very low level of proficiency. What can we do at home? What can we talk about? Can we talk about politics? Can we talk about the workplace? Can we talk about science? Can we raise the level? Can we expose our students at home to sort of written materials, to blogs, to newspapers, to literature in our home cultures, to raise not just the speaking abilities, but also those literate ones? And so it became a really wonderful place for dialogue. So what's happening nationally? If you look at this map, and you'll be delighted to see that in blue, along with the other these, and this comes to us from the sealedbiliteracy.org. Would you just kind of stand up? Yes. And so this is an incredible place for all things Sealed by Literacy. And if you have some specific questions, there you are. So now you have Elizabeth. And she could answer some of those specific questions. And they do a really wonderful job of keeping this map updated, because the changes are frequent. And in some states, it's actually a little bit muddy, because each state is taking it individually, what fits for them. And so we see a couple of states that say, well, we really should be blue, but we just haven't called it the Seal of Biliteracy yet. And so, you know, but it's interesting. But the blue states are those that have adopted. And then we also see some states that are kind of somewhere in legislative process and starting to consider it. I had an incredible conversation this week with the state of Iowa, and so to see what they're doing. Wisconsin has sort of approved it within their Board of Education, but not at the state level. It's kind of in a transition piece. And we have in Oregon several districts that are piloting it. So in some places it's happening. Colorado also has 3 districts that have sort of triangulated, as well as Florida. And so we start to see it happening. And some places it's very grassroots, and some places it's very top-down from the government. But what's exciting is that this list is growing and growing. And it's a wildfire. It's because it makes so much sense for our students. And the really cool part about it is it doesn't cost so much, because what's going on with language learning is already happening in our schools. And so in Illinois, we like to call it a low cost, no cost. You know, the cost to my district is really nice certificates and punch and cookies at the program. And, you know, we are this year going to splurge, and we're going to get honor cords. But it's not it's a piece that becomes about students. And there's not a lot of legislation that goes on that doesn't necessarily come down and impact students at that personal level. But I've had students now get scholarships because they have the Sealed by Literacy. I have a student who won an internship, and they said, well, we saw that you have the Sealed by Literacy, so that means you're probably pretty good. And again, it's a recognition by the community at large of what that must mean, even if they don't understand all of the details. And so nationally, the perspective is that we need to kind of work on this as a team so we can standardize what this means and uphold the value across the country of the Sealed by Literacy, and yet at the same time recognize the needs that are unique to each state. A really good example of that might be the state of New Mexico, where they call theirs the Seal of Bilingualism, because they have a lot of Native American indigenous languages that don't have a written form. That was something for that. We have allowances in the state of Illinois for Latin. And it's although there are there's a movement afloat to teach Latin as a spoken language. It's not that common. But we also see the American Sign Language community being honored. And so those pieces, so there's a lot of ways that people communicate, and we wanted to honor those. So then we had the opportunity, Michelle and I both served on this committee, to design national guidelines, and you have them in your folder. And so they are simply that. They're guidelines for states to implement. They're examples of what some states have been able to do, and it gives you a place to start. In Illinois, we started from scratch, because of the way our particular bill came to use, because even though we sort of followed the steps of New York in legislation, New York didn't implement until just this last year. And so we were doing a lot of scrounging work, and we used Washington State, who actually followed us officially, but preceded us by thinking and planning and strategizing ahead. And so each state has its sort of own unique journey. But then we also looked at this as a part of this initiative then was to have a website done to assist states. And these 4 organizations, all of which deal with languages, both sort of foreign languages, the FL, if you will, traditionally known as, TESOL for American, for English, teachers of English as second language, NABE, which is bilingual, and then the SUSPL, which is an organization of state supervisors for those people that are taking the leadership roles in each state and designing and coordinating language programs. So let's get to Hawaii. And this is the piece that what you are going to do and are doing. You will be those high school graduates who demonstrate high proficiency, and here's your uniqueness in either of the 2 official languages. I don't think any other state can say that. So that's pretty exciting. And one additional. So you're actually sort of ahead of the curve in terms of looking at those opportunities and making awareness of multiple languages, including American Sign, so also included, will be awarded. And so when you look at this, this is a kind of a language roadmap of what Hawaii looks like. Yes, there's an awful lot of English speakers, but look at a number of languages spoken. What incredible richness and diversity and economic opportunity. I don't think these are the combinations of language. I know they're not the combination of languages that are spoken in Illinois. In Illinois, our second most common language is Spanish, and our third most common language is Polish. We have a huge Polish population. We also have a fairly large Mandarin population, and we have a large Lithuanian and Croatian population. I mean, we have, lots of little neighborhoods, but we don't have this level of diversity. And what a gift for a state to have, and what an opportunity if these languages can be supported and recognized. And so there's both educational benefits as well as the economic ones. For example, you have that concept of diversity, that multicultural and multilingual diversity. We've got studies that will document the mental and the sort of benefits to the brain and brain learning with languages. I started learning Mandarin because I'm not very good at it, so I can do a few little phrases here and there. But it's supposed to ward off Alzheimer's, so I'm in. But there's actual documentation to that, so it's not too late at all. Increased trade with language partners, especially for workers who speak Asian languages. Why? You have an advantage there? Because they are less commonly studied in the 48. And honestly, that's a huge opportunity because, you have people here who are native speakers of the languages, of those Asian languages, and we have to import ours for the most part. And so the last piece is that globally, this is what the data says, that bilinguals earn 5 to 15% more. So who wouldn't want to provide that for our students? Who wouldn't want to make them more competitive? So I thought it'd be interesting to say, what do my students say? Well, this is Santiago, otherwise Steve. And Steve is that student he's actually eating cuy. It's a guinea pig head in Ecuador. We were on a trip. Boys like to do the things that will most gross out everyone else. But he's the one that said, about my boss. My boss said that, you must be really good because that seal of biliteracy sounds official and it sounds important and it's recognized by people. This young lady is Maddie, and Maddie has Asperger's, and she's actually quite high on the Asperger's scale. And for some crazy reason, she found a different sort of identity in her second language. She could hardly communicate in any class in English. But in my class, because it was required, and we practice in small groups, and we practice all the time, and it's part of the job, she wants to get an A. She's very, very, whatever I have to do to get an A, she was forced to speak. And I actually took her on tour on this particular picture as a sophomore. We were in Argentina visiting a school. And there was this one little girl who was shy and had sort of stood back from the rest. And she walked over her, and she kind of maybe connected with this young lady, and they spent the rest of the day together. After that, Maddie came with me again on another tour and was helpful in helping other students get the language things they need to get done in the language. And she sort of played that backseat role of helping another. Her senior year, she was like in charge. Her mother could not believe what she could do in Spanish that she was unable to do for herself in English. Well, Maddie's really interested in sciences, and she's now working as an intern in a marine biology program in Ecuador in Spanish. Because language helps us find a different part of ourselves. This particular student is Joey Romero, but he called himself Romeo Romero in class. We thought that was pretty fun. And he is a geeky kind of boy. And right now he's working with pharmaceutical companies in Illinois and he's working as sort of a liaison and travels back and forth to South America where they're working with some new kinds of medicines that are being found and tested in the rainforest. And he said, I never would have had that opportunity without language, without the seal of biliteracy. Because of that, his university gave him a lot of credit. He went in as a junior and actually was able to double major and not having to take a full load of classes. So it saved his family a lot of money, and it gave him a lot of opportunity. So too violent to quit. So how do we seal a deal? Again, that question I like to ask, well, what if? So what if we start the conversation? That's what we're here about. What if we think about how do we collaborate? We each have something different we can contribute to support students, to support their language learning experiences. What if we cooperate? So not just collaborate with ideas, but we actually begin to cooperate and put programs into place that support each other. Think about the cultural diversity that we can not only support and enrich, but sustain. Because too many times when a language is lost, so is its cultural perspectives. And those perspectives give us understanding not just of ourselves and our communities, but our past, our heritage, but also those other people who are still using those languages. What about the commercial opportunity? What if we did this? What would that expand? What opportunities would we have, and in this case, Hawaii have as a state? And the community engagement. What a wonderful way to support the communities around us, those rich cultural spaces. And so I want to thank you for your time. I have a few minutes to take some questions. I think that's how it's going to go. Yes. And so we can all do the hashtag.
Good morning. My name is Yuna Chan from OSIS. My question to you would be, how did your state assess your students to be certified or to receive the state seal of biliteracy?
And in our state, we have we have two levels we've determined. One is a commendation toward, that's sort of a recognition of commitment toward language learning, and then the actual seal of biliteracy. And so what we chose to do, because we want to maintain that level of what does that mean, not just in Illinois, but what would it mean to a student going out of state to a university? What would it mean across the country? And so we're using those standard proficiency levels that were identified in that map, and we are using external assessments because, as I mentioned earlier, just because some students got all A's doesn't necessarily measure what they're able to really do in a language. And so what we've used is standardized testing that's available. In our state, most of that testing was already in place. So, for example, for the English certification, that's already a part of just those school testing pieces that students are already taking. In our case, those were tests that were taken as juniors in the state of Illinois. There's a state test they take. And so then the other piece was, what will we do about the language testing pieces? And so there's a number of language testing that's available. Again, that was already in place because that makes it easy for a school district. It was the advanced placement, or in some cases, we have schools that are international baccalaureate, although those are not as common in Illinois. And so those tests were sort of already out there and are available. But we did have some of those students that were in a language that was not, and we had to look at some competency tests. But there's a number of them available. And the wonderful thing about that sort of wildfire of across the country of states adopting it is that oftentimes availability is because of demand. And so as the demand increases, we're seeing the availability of tests and very affordable ones. In fact, we're testing in the next couple of weeks for some seniors, and that testing is about $20. So in our particular case, in our district, that $20 assessment is borne by our students. And so there's no cost to our district for that. We also have funding available for students that have, some financial assistance needs. But each state, again, is kind of doing that a little bit differently. But the big piece or argument we would support, and the national guidelines support, is that that is an external assessment. There are also, in the state of Illinois, some options for languages that are maybe we can't find an assessment for. And so they have some fine print of how to handle some of those unusual situations. And I think that's what most states, and I think you're going to hear from Michelle a little bit later about some of the other things that are available. Does that answer your question? Yes? Okay, good.
You can keep that
Oh,
one.
I'll keep
I'll
this
use
one.
it, yes.
Hi, I'm Betty Brow. I can totally relate to everything you said and presented. It's very interesting. I went to school in France when I lived there from the age of 18 to 13 and a half. Mm-hmm. So I went to elementary school and junior high there. And in junior high school, from the grade 6 to 8 equivalent, I had to take 2 languages. So English was my second language. French was my first, of course, but mm-hmm. English was my second, and then German was my third language in 8th grade, and they were mandatory. It was not, mm-hmm. elective or anything like that. And certainly the students were very competent, mm-hmm. In fact, when I came to the United States, I continued to take German for 2 additional years, and I won the award for top student in German when I graduated. But I cannot even claim that language anymore because I haven't used it for so many years, so I forgot that. But I can still speak French, and I speak Vietnamese. I'm a native Vietnamese speaker, so. Wow. But anyhow, regarding testing, I know the State Department has a standard testing for Foreign Service officer, mm-hmm. and it's recognized worldwide. So I wonder whether that could be something that the school could at least ask whether we could use the same thing, because then it would standardize the proficiency level for the students.
So the proficiency levels that we saw in this chart, those are already correlated to what the Defense Institute uses. Mm-hmm. And so those really are sort of, if you will, the American standards, which are also correlated to those that are used in Europe, and actually a new kind of piece that's coming out of Asia, so that what we're looking at is will become sort of internationally correlatable, if we will. And so I think that's a real big piece, and I think that becomes then that nitty-gritty of implementation, that what works for your state, that also allows for all of those languages to be represented. But again, a model of multi-language skills, so thank you.
I also noticed that on your pie chart for language mm-hmm. in Hawaii, Vietnamese is missing. And there's a huge population here of Vietnamese people, and I hear the language. When I go to Chinatown, that's all I hear practically. So I'm kind of surprised it's not up there.
That's what I hear when I treat myself to a manicure in my state. Yes. So, do you want to speak to that or no? The missing Vietnamese? Yes.
I suppose the pie chart is only as good as the people who collect the data. Obviously, they weren't using UH researchers.
There we go. That could very well be true.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for making this fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you so much.
I learned it a lot from you. I'm Kim Kondo-Brown, Associate Dean of the College of Languages and Linguistics and Literature at UH Manoa. I understand one of the issues associated with the implementation of the seal of biliteracy is the is the issue of getting support from higher educations in recognizing it. I'd like to know in Illinois what sort of conversations are happening with regard to this issue.
What's happening in Illinois, because we're not as advanced as what Michelle's going to speak to, what's incredibly coordinated in the state of Washington, is that right now we don't have a very good dialogue. And part of that is because we don't have someone in our state office that coordinates languages. So we don't actually, right now, as surprising as this is going to sound, the seal of biliteracy right now in Illinois is in the hands of the Illinois State Board of Education's publicity department. Because it's so well received in the community, which is interesting, because yes, that's true, but it means that it's left in some cases to the schools to figure out. But what we found, since we did, in our first year as a state, have over 1,000 students qualify, is that we found that the universities they're, well, what do we do with this? And this happened, I got a call in Florida where they're doing it at a district level. Miami-Dade colleges said, well, we're getting these kids, what does that mean? And so that becomes a big piece of the dialogue and that integration, which is why this meeting is so critically important, that you're all here together to begin that collaboration and that conversation, which we didn't have in my state. And so what we're seeing is that in some universities, they're still using the advanced placement test, which was used to certify the student's level as a placement piece. In other places, there's still universities that will ask for a placement test. But we are just beginning to see, and one of the incredible opportunities is that with the seal of biliteracy, a student can actually go into a university setting with a language that didn't come from their high school transcript, because they're actually able to qualify in a language that's not offered in their high school because it's a heritage language. So I think as we see it sweep the country, and it is a wildfire that has been very quickly raging. And so, I mean, if you look at those, we're like 2013, 14, 15, it's taking the university a little bit, and they're excited about it. I got a call from DePaul University, one of the major universities in Illinois, and they said, how do we get the list? And they really do. They want these students. These students are going to be incredibly attracted to them. So that I think here you actually, because you're all here, you actually have maybe a step ahead of us. But I know Michelle can speak really specifically to some very intentional things that they've been doing in Washington State. And other states, again, it's really new, it's recent, and it's kind of catching up. So I can't, that's as much as I can say.
No, thank you so much.
Anything else? And I know we're going to switch soon. But okay, good.
I just wanted to speak briefly to the point that was mentioned. In fact, the Dean's Office has already convened a committee. Its esteemed members are here. Robert Huey in East Asian languages, and Paul Chandler in European languages, and John Meyer in Indo-Pacific languages, and have created a statement which was approved by the Dean and shared with the Board of Education that the UH is in support, UH Manoa is in support of the seal of biliteracy, and will work with the high schools to find a way to make sure that recognition will be given to students coming to UH with that seal.
So kudos to Hawaii. Yes.
Other questions, please?
My name is Luan. I'm the coordinator for the NLSC National Language Service Corps. My question is not related to my job, but I would like to ask the question with the parent's perspective. I'm a mother of a daughter who is 16 years old, so she's junior high school students. She just switched her second language to study Spanish. Of course, there are a lot of opportunities for people who speak second language out there in the society, I understand. But my question is that how, as a mother, as the parent, how do I inspire, how do I encourage my daughter to improve, to strengthen their Spanish proficiency by obtaining a seal in her certificate, for example, or reward from the seal biliteracy. Is there any connection with, is there any connection between the seal of biliteracy with any potential employers? So that's maybe a good reason to inspire, for example. Yes.
Certainly. And first of all, I think your perspective as a parent is the one that our parents are so excited about this because you want the most opportunity for your child possible. And so parents are the community is very, very excited about this. And we've actually had some incoming parents for our freshmen say, well, my student has to have Spanish or French or Mandarin all 4 years because we want them to get the seal of biliteracy, and they're starting to recognize its value. And so right now with employers, again, we're sort of like, we had this little kind of baby that we launched, and instead of being sort of premature, it's like it's like it's like the babies when they're born and they're 10 pounds and they say they walk out of the hospital walking. I mean, that's kind of what this has been like, because it really has taken on not just, feet, I mean, it's taken on like running legs to see what's actually happening and how quickly. So I think what we're seeing with the employers and what we've just seen with our own students, and again, we're only, just very shortly there into the program, but we're seeing that when they write seal of biliteracy, that if that doesn't necessarily mean something to the employer, if they ask the question, it actually opens up a dialogue. Well, that means that I am able to do some functional language tasks that are appropriate to occasional workforce use. And I think that sort of dialogue is starting to grow. So I think that you will see that as well as for opportunity. But I also think that question about how do I encourage my child and one of the things that I just do as a teacher in my classroom is, again, I mentioned in my presentation, to sort of paint the vision. So when they come home with some new vocabulary or some new structures that they're worried, my first question to my students is, how would you use this in the workforce? So if they're learning something as simple as maybe house vocabulary, I might ask the question, well, how would a realtor use these words? How would a contractor use these words? How would a banker or a mortgage lender need this vocabulary? And so to begin to help them see how what they're learning connects, even at a very low, sort of novice level of language learning, how does that connect to what's going on in a real work situation? And here you hear so many different languages, then to say, what do you think they were talking about? Did you notice how that person was able to shift to another language? Do you think that was providing them with more opportunities? And I think just high school students aren't aware of what's out there yet. And so as sort of that person to come alongside and say, did you notice that? And that becomes that sort of awareness of the power of their skill. And then maybe to get them digitally involved in for her case in Spanish, to say, get her connected with, I think Spanish was on the pie chart, but really, really tiny. So, to begin to give her some other opportunities outside of, her geographic area, because there's, whether it's, blog posts and all those kinds of things that allow her to expand her curiosity. And then I always with my students connect their career interests with language. So how will you use this with, you're interested in sciences, and to begin to explore opportunities in other languages that relate to their interest. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, so we'll see that grow.
Thank you very much.